Good afternoon and welcome. Today I am joined by Ric Moylan, who is a performance coach, and we've just realised we're about 200 metres away from each other. So we're both in Didsbury. He's at a place that I go to frequently for a great breakfast. So I can thoroughly recommend that. But Ric, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. Thanks for having me on it. And it's a healthy breakfast, of course, isn't it?
Obviously, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of avocado options, which is, that seems to be flavour of the month at the moment. But no, Ric, thank you for joining. Is that I've followed your journey from a distance, but for a while now. So it's really interesting. So I'm really looking forward to understanding a bit more about how you got to where you got and what you're doing and what the plans are for the future. So starting off, where are you from originally?
Yeah, again, thanks for having us on. You're absolutely right. We've just realised before we started recording that we're literally about 200, not even meters, probably 200 yards away from each other, aren't we? Without knowing. And yeah, I'm in the nice suburban area of Didsbury at the minute. I'm from Manchester. I'm from the city centre. I was born in Moss Side and lived and grew up in an area called Hume before moving to Old Trafford, right near to Man United's ground, which I'll leave who I support there, which may or may not be welcome from the listeners. But yeah, born and raised in Manchester, travelled a lot with work, but home and heart is still very much here.
So when I first moved to Manchester, I lived right by the Asda in Hume probably lived there for about 4 years. So I absolutely, that was for me moving from Southport to Manchester. And to me, it was like, oh, this is so exciting. You can like walk into Deansgate locks and all of that. And it's like, because Hume has changed, I presume from your side, that was just the norm for me when I was there, but it was a load of new residential areas. But what was it like when you were there?
Yeah, growing up, I'm very blessed, very lucky.
Mate.
Sorry about that. I've no
That's all
idea
right.
what happened there.
No, it's all right. We'll cut that bit out, so it's no problem. So yeah, you were just saying about growing up in Hume, I think.
Yes, so I've been very blessed growing up. Good, simple upbringing, but good upbringing. Mum, dad, and sister. Hume was a very, very simple area, but always, and I believe has retained a community vibe, but always was very much a community when I grew up. It kind of lends to one of my theories, which perhaps we'll get into, and we'll. I know we're gonna go off on a few different tangents, aren't we? But one of my big beliefs is that inner city areas all over the country have got hidden world champions in them. So I grew up playing sport a lot. with all my friends who were all keen, sports competitors in various different sports, and that was all I ever wanted to do, was be involved in sport. And when the opportunity to be involved as an athlete wasn't there for me for whatever reason, it just led me into my pathway of my career. I was always going to work in sport. That was all I ever wanted to do.
And which sport do you think it would have been if you could have chosen to play?
I was always a footballer. Football was always my sport of choice. I went to as the listener may or may not know, and maybe we'll get into, but I've had quite a long career in combat sports and boxing in particular. I never boxed much as a kid, but I did do a lot of kickboxing, a lot of martial arts. That was I sort of think from my parents to keep me out of trouble. I think was one of the reasons for that, and it definitely did instill discipline into me. But I use this joke all the time. I had world-class head movement. The problem was it was in the wrong direction. I used to block punches with my face, so I was never going to be a professional kickboxer or a professional boxer. It was absolutely going to be football. And I've done bits. I've actually done quite a bit of work in football. Some of it is under NDA, so I can't really discuss that too much. But I just love sport. I even to this day, in my mind, I'll give anything a go, and I'll try any sport. I enjoy it.
And so how important from a combat sport perspective, like you hear a lot, whether it's Eddie Hearn or people are always talking about how boxing saved certain athletes, Anthony Joshua or people like that. What's your viewpoint on that for whether it's MMA or boxing?
Yeah, I think there's initiatives now, and I was with somebody last week, and they're still quite small. If you look in the grand scheme of big cities, Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, London, and a lot of these initiatives are trying to give the youth opportunities to take part in sport, opportunities to participate. Even from things such as free bus passes, so that they can travel from one place to the next. Because the reason why some of these athletes would lend into combat sports, for example, is because of two things. One, because they'd had quite a difficult upbringing, and there's a potential argument that they've been hardened to the harsh realities of life from a young age. But then also, and this is perhaps more to the point, that I think that they weren't given the opportunity to be a tennis player or a motor racing driver, or a number of other sports, because they grew up in working class areas, and the finances were not there for them to ever be able to participate in horse racing or any one of those sports where it requires quite a lot of money to be involved.
Yeah. Well, no, it definitely does. And like, how do you see as well from being involved in that, like the growth of MMA, particularly the UFC, but other things as well? That's massive, isn't it? So that they've acquired WWE, or there's some merger gone on recently. So their growth is just huge, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's incredible what they've done, and I'm watching MMA. I'm quite a keen MMA fan, and my son, I've got a son who's nearly 14, and he is very, very much into UFC and MMA, and you can see that even on a local level, the shows are just starting to get a little bit bigger. They're starting to get a little bit, into slightly bigger venues, and they're certainly looking like they're better organized. They're getting a bit more TV time now, and I think it's UFC is obviously, from a in-person spectator perspective, is big now in America. It's getting bigger over here. It's only a matter of time before the sport really goes big. It is a lot. I know 2 or 3, maybe 4 clubs who run mixed martial arts clubs, and their participation levels are growing and growing, and they're breaking down the barriers now that the sport is, it's inclusive to all, that you don't have to be, you know, super tough to get involved, that there's a lot of skill involved. So yeah, it's nice to see, you know, boxing has been on an upward trajectory, I think, for a while now. I think MMA is coming up alongside that, and it's great to see, because going sideways, I think combat is such a useful skill that all of us should have, and it's not just from a self-defense perspective, it's from a health and fitness and a mental health perspective, but also I think there's so many transferable skills, such as discipline, that you can transfer into other elements of your life as well. And this is kind of quite a bold statement here, and I was having this discussion again with somebody very recently. I've actually been pressing my local council, and I'll continue to do so, because I really believe that combat sports should form part of a school curriculum. And I think it would help with communication skills. I think it would help with empathy, understanding. I think it would help with reducing violence amongst youth. And that's quite a bold statement, I know, but I really believe that.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. It gives them some sort of cathartic release of energy and a focus to achieve something. And yeah, no, it's interesting, because I think it's like, again, the boxing, that certainly over the last 10 years, that's really become massive, big business, and there seems to be a lot more on TV, and the same with UFC. So no, it will be interesting to see where they go. So then, from your perspective, then, so what was your first step into the world of work in this area?
I left college. I did okay at college. I kind of wasn't quite sure. I went to university a few years later, but at that stage, sort of 18, 19, I wasn't quite ready to push on with, you know, further education from there. So I actually did some, I self-funded some vocational qualifications, and my ambition, which I then got into, was to become a personal trainer. And I'd met a gentleman who was already active in the job at that time, and he was literally just beginning his first sort of steps into the pro sport arena, and he unknowingly to him at that time became my first mentor, because I just latched onto him, and you know, yeah, I've always believed in, if you don't ask, you don't get, and you've got to make things happen for yourself in this life and in this career. So I kind of followed what he was doing a little bit, whilst, you know, trying to develop my own skills. And I was working with general population, and understanding people, and understanding how to communicate, and trying to develop those soft skills, because our job, as we know, is, it's not just about anatomy and physiology. It's not just about knowing the biomechanics of our person works. It's about how's their day been that day. How, you know, if they had a good day, if they had a bad day, can we communicate to them? Do they trust us? Can we get our message across to them? And any one of those things. So I was very much learning, you know, all of those sort of softer skills, let's say. And I often say to people now, I became a personal trainer, and I had a fair bit of knowledge of the trainer angle, but I developed more so the knowledge of the personal angle, working with people that were successful, people that were wealthy, people that weren't wealthy, people that didn't like exercise, and having to adapt into all of those different environments. But I always had an eye on sport, and I always had an eye on wanting to be involved in sport. So I continued working, I continued learning. I became, you know, a couple of years older, and I was friends with a couple of lecturers at the University of Salford, who encouraged me to get into an exercise physiology and exercise and health science based degree, which I did. And whilst seeking out whilst studying, I did some part-time work to put food on the table, because you've got to pay your own bills as well in life. That's something I really believe in. And I did what I encourage everybody to do, which is I got out there and I did some voluntary work.
So just going back to what you mentioned about the kind of the mindset bit, because I don't know whether it's just my own realizations and when I'm listening to athletes and ex-athletes talk about things, but like the mental side of things just seems to be even more prevalent now. But back when you were 18, 19, was it as talked about then?
No, it absolutely wasn't. And there's a history in terms of a very close family member with mental health in my family. And it's funny because many years later, as I'd done my degree and I was working in sport, and as you know, sports science and all those things can be quite heavily data driven, and it can be very much, if you perform this action, you get this outcome. And in a perfect world, that's how it is. But what about if the athlete is not feeling so good that day? What about if they've had an argument with their significant other before coming into the lab or before coming to training? What about if they're feeling pressure or stress, or their mood is low? And historically, those things absolutely weren't spoken about. Certainly not in my experience, anyway. And that was one of the learning pathways that I went on. Is that you've got your academic pathway, but actually it's understanding that athletes are people. They have ups and downs, they have highs and lows, they have hopes and dreams and insecurities, like every single one of us. And I think when I sort of twigged that, it gave me a more rounded skill set as a coach, that actually it isn't just about let's just take them into the gym, do some squats, and then we'll get this outcome. Because actually I've taken clients for a walk and we've had a chat, and then they've gone out and give me some PBs, whereas perhaps when I was a little younger, I would press the issue and force the training session that day or that week or whatever, and we wouldn't get as strong an outcome come competition day at the weekend.
And is that something which is that quite widely known in the industry now? Like, is that taught on any of the courses that you've been on about understanding the person, or has that changed over time?
The courses I've been on were historically, very sort of, at that time it was very much science driven, whereas now I think, like anything, everybody's evolving, understanding's changing. We are teaching more about the overall role of a coach, in terms of the coach as a listener, the coach as a communicator, the coach having empathy. That is, I mean, I can remember in a lot of scenarios, and I think if you speak, I've never been in the military, but some of my friends who were in the military would say that exercise was often a punishment to them. So then when they transferred into their early careers, they would often, use exercise as a punishment to then try and elicit a better performance response. And we now know that just often isn't the way. So, going back to myself, what I actually realized on that journey was that actually a lot of what had held me back as a sportsman was actually what was going on up here. It was confidence and self-esteem, and that whilst this athlete may be a British champion, or maybe pushing towards an Olympic Games or a professional team or something like that, they're a human being, and they have good days, they have bad days, they have days when they just don't fancy it, they have days when they just can't be bothered, and we've got to flex and adapt our approach to draw the best out of them. Yeah, that is sometimes the occasional kick up the backside, the occasional, tough love, but then equally we've got to show them understanding. We've got to show them empathy, that their body may be sore. They may have DOMs, but they may have the equivalent of DOMs going on up here as well. And sometimes we've got to dial it back in order to get the best out of them, and to keep them healthy and happy as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, particularly when you've got athletes, say boxers, tennis players. I know you've worked with those, and there's that individual athletes. Is how do you see the difference between that and people playing football, for example, where it's a team game and they've got an infrastructure around them, whereas tennis and boxers is kind of eat what you kill, isn't it, for both of those professions?
Yeah, the dynamics are absolutely very different. They both have their strengths, and they both have their areas that you know, one could argue are their advantages, let's say, but then equally they've both got separate challenges. Isolation, loneliness in those individual sports is something that's very, very common. Often they spend, particularly in tennis, I mean, most tennis players spend 46 weeks of the year on the road, you know, so they're out of their home environment. So it's understanding that, and understanding. And actually, you know, when I first got involved in tennis, I was a young man that actually wasn't very well travelled. So me trying to understand that, and you know, just the way sort of my mindset was in some, you know, sometimes would be just a bit like, get on with it. Whereas I actually decided to, you know, pack my bags, and I was given the opportunity to pack my bags and go traveling with a tennis player, and then with a couple of tennis players and beyond. And of course, you see that it's great. You're traveling to different cities, different countries all over the world, but then equally, sometimes it can be quite lonely and quite isolating. So as a coach, you've very much got to adapt your approach to understand the feelings of the athlete. And then separately from that, there's the second challenge then, that you're in each other's pocket all the time. So sometimes it's knowing when to be with them and coach them, and then when to sometimes just draw back and let them, you know, go for a coffee on their own, or go for a coffee with, you know, if there's another tennis teammate with us, well, let's just let the players go, and let's let the coaches just draw back. So it's the jigsaw of coaching, isn't it? And the jigsaw, the performance jigsaw of the athlete. That the athlete is the central piece of the jigsaw, but there's so many other pieces of that jigsaw, and some of them are big and some of them are small. But fitting it all together is a challenge. And have I always got it right? Absolutely not. Have there been some massive wins and massive highs? Yeah, that there have, and I've been blessed. But then there have been some lows, and some, you know, big lows, and you know, losses, and all those kind of things. But you know, for me, what I've always tried to do, and I would always encourage any of my peers to do this, is to try and pass your mirror test every day, is to look in the mirror and say, have I given my best? And if you've given your best, then I think you're doing your job as a coach. You don't always get it right, but if you've given your best and you're doing your job.
Yeah. No, that is really interesting. I've just started watching Breakpoint, which is it's a really interesting insight, isn't it, into tennis world. And like again, I've seen quite a few of the tennis players, and it's so different. This is a very, very high level of tennis, and you can't compare it to the Premier League setup, even though that ranking wise they're very similar, well, or higher level than some of the players that are playing in the Premier League. So no, it's a really interesting premise. And then in terms of like, so you'd done your degree at Salford, you were saying, and then what was the next step for you then? Like, were you already working at that point?
Yeah, so I always had a keen interest in. I went back to Salford many years later, and did my master's degree in strength conditioning. But I'd done a number of other qualifications, some of them based around coaching, some of them based around, you know, mindset and NLP and things like that. Some of them based around communication skills. You know, just a various sort of different quals. But yeah, I was very active. I was volunteering while I was doing my degree, and then I managed. I got an introduction by pure luck. I was working at a very small local amateur boxing club, and I really loved combat sports, and I really had a keen eye on combat sports. And then a friend at the time, just out of the blue, said to me, I've got a young professional boxer that I'd like to introduce you to. He's a friend of mine. He'd just turned professional a year or two earlier. I wasn't having an easy transition, because boxers go from being an amateur boxer and then there's that transition into the professional ranks, which again on pen and paper should be smooth, but it isn't. They go to, all of a sudden they're thrown into Sky Sports and big stadiums and pressure, and what I call the lonely walk, which is the walk to the boxing ring used to be quite short because they were competing in a leisure centre. Now all of a sudden they've got thousands of fans that they're walking. They're sort of parting the waves almost to walk to the boxing ring, and nobody had ever coached them how to deal with the nerves on that walk to the ring. And so it's the transition from amateur to pro is a big one. And he knew this young professional boxer, and he said, I think you two would be a good fit. I'll make an introduction. I'd had quite a few rejections. I'd applied for a few jobs in pro sport at that time, and rejection's part of life. And I would urge people to get out there and to face those rejections. But yeah, this young boxer was Anthony Crolla, who went on to become the WBA world champion. So I started working with him for very minimal, he won't mind me saying, and this is all good, but it was very minimal financial reward at that time. But there was another boxer in the gym called Tony Bellew, and so next minute I'm talking to Tony, and there was 2-3 others in there, and before you know it, I'm away, and I'm working as a strength and conditioning coach and a performance coach in combat sports, which I absolutely loved. Even back then, I love it as much, if not more now. I'd done a little bit of this kind of stuff myself. I was a real keen student of it, and and away we went. And then simultaneously, literally as that happened, I also got approached from another friend of mine saying the exact same. These two people didn't know each other. I've got a young athlete that I think you could help, and I think you'd like to meet. He'd like to meet you. You'd like to meet him. You'd be good for each other. And that was British tennis player Liam Brodie. And again, before I know it, I'm down at a tennis club. I'm saying to myself, I am hopeless at tennis. I am absolutely hopeless. What do I know about tennis? But you know what? Sod it. Probably used slightly different words to that, but we'll leave that there. And away I went. And I've always been not afraid to give things a go. So before I knew it, I'm working with a young Anthony Crolla, a young Liam Brodie, two totally different sports. But arms are arms, legs are legs. But the mental challenges were very, very different. But equally, there was some crossover. Fast forward, I ended up doing almost 20 years with Liam Brodie, and after doing a few years with Anthony Crolla and Tony Bellew and a couple of the other guys at the gym in the north side of Manchester, I was approached by Ricky Hatton to then go on board with Team Hatton and head up their performance side from there.
Right, that's amazing. So what do you think it was about you that the different people had thought that you would be a good fit for those up and coming athletes?
I mean, I'd like to say it was my charm and charisma and good looks and all those kind of things, but I think we have, as coaches, of course, we have to know what we're doing. We've got to learn. We've got to be open-minded and always be prepared to continue to learn. It's okay for us not to have all the answers, but what we've got to do is try and seek out the answers. But I think, for me personally, I would like to think that I'm a very honest, real and raw kind of person, and that I've always loved sport and been super passionate about sport. Those two athletes in particular, Anthony and Liam, were good lads, nice lads, cheeky chappies, both of them, very similar in some kind of ways, and both of them still are. I know both of them still really well. So I very much, I think, had that style that could roll with that personality type and that sort of cheeky Mancunian lad, but then equally I could command a little bit of respect when I needed to as well. And yeah, you know, I loved working with both of them. That led me as well to working with a ton of different athletes, in Scott Quigg in particular for nearly 10 years in combat sports, and I've done bits in tennis as well, but I've travelled the world with Liam. And yeah, that led me into football and military and special forces and police forces and all kinds of stuff. And my passion for it today is as much, if not more, than it ever was back then.
So how old were you at that point then when you got working with those two athletes?
I would have been about 21, I think, at that time, 22. And I'm in my mid 40s now, which we'll leave there. So yeah, you know, I've been in the game over 20 years now, and done a variety of different things, different sports. But yeah, you know, I love it, and I love seeing talent reach its potential. I really do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then, so what do you think would have happened if, say, you hadn't been introduced to those guys? Like, where were you working in any sort of gym at that point, or was like what would have happened if you hadn't have met those two?
I honestly believe that I would have found my way into sport, because I'm that kind of person. I just I remember seeing a statement many years ago, and it was that the key to success is rejection. The key to massive success is massive rejection. And I wasn't afraid to put myself out there, and I wasn't afraid to. I don't believe that sitting and waiting for things to happen to you or for you in life is the way forward. You've got to get out there and get up off your backside and go to the right places, and make yourself known. And again, I say to people, when people often write to me, or say write to me, I'm showing my age there, but they'll DM me on Instagram or whatever, and they'll ask, can they come and do some volunteering work with me or some shadowing work with me, and what I want to know is what they're going to bring to the table, what's unique about them. And so that was the approach that I always had. I went to these athletes, and I went to these stables and coaching environments, and not only was I asking for something, but I was also pushing out what I was going to give in return, what I was going to bring. So I always believe that if I hadn't have met those two athletes, that I would have found my way. I believe that those two athletes would have. I am very proud of the most. I played a much smaller role in Anthony's career, and a much bigger role in Liam Brody's career. But either way, I believe them two athletes would also have done very well, because they're nice lads. They're very talented, but equally they've both, behind their nice smiles, they're very resilient as well.
And so what was that like for you then when you go traveling with, whether it's Liam or Anthony? Like, what was it like for you, kind of going straight out and being on the tennis tour? Like, how was that for you, your mental side and so on?
Yeah, I travelled far less with Anthony. His fights were much more local at that time. But certainly when I got into the Hatton camp, and then you know, because Ricky's network was very big, and it was the back end of Ricky's career. But Ricky had a stable of young fighters coming through. But you know, so I travelled much more with them. But with Liam, yeah, you know, straight away out onto tournaments, onto courts, into tennis centres, and absolutely there was times when I would face imposter syndrome. There was absolutely times when I would look around and think, you know, what am I doing here? A lad from Moss-Side. Do I sort of belong in these environments? All those kind of limiting beliefs and all that kind of stuff. But I realised that they were just words and thoughts and feelings that were going on inside my head. And if they were, you know, going on inside my head, then I could change them. And the way you change them is by tackling them head on. It was okay that I didn't know everything. It was okay that I didn't know everything about tennis, and 20 years later still don't. I mean, who does? Because there is no ceiling to your learning journey. And I think if you're humble enough with that, it's okay to say, hey, actually, I don't know the answer to that, But what I am going to do is go and find the answer, whether that's in a book or on the internet, or whether that's from somebody more experienced than I am. It's okay that you don't know the answer, but it's not okay to stay there. So, I would absolutely battle a number of emotions and feelings of whether, I'd go into Wimbledon on a number of occasions, and I've been very blessed to do that, and the French Open. And then I went with British tennis out to the IMG Academy in Florida, which was a phenomenal experience. And yeah, of course, there's always these feelings of, wow, do I belong? Am I good enough? But I think that also gives you the edge still, and keeps your tools sharp. And it certainly has done with me. I've utilised those feelings to make sure complacency's never kicked in.
Yeah, no, I can imagine it would be incredible going out to these different areas. And so, whilst you were working with like, some of these professional athletes, were you doing other things alongside that as well?
Yeah. I've always been quite keen to broaden my horizons, and of course some of the work with those athletes has been quite time demanding at times, but then there'd be other times when it was less so. So I believe in giving back. So I'm a keen charity worker. I raise funds. I do an annual event every year called Charity Boxing Nights, which raises funds for the newborn intensive care unit in Manchester. So I've raised nearly £500,000 so far, which I'm really, really, really proud of. And I've always believed in giving back, particularly to youth. So I volunteer still as often as I can at my local boxing club, which is the nearest one to me, which is very much my club, is in Salford in Greater Manchester, a club called Bridgewater. And then again, many years ago, I started doing talks to youngsters, to youths, and trying to talk to them about utilising their talents and getting into sport, and not letting barriers such as finance, of course, if and where possible, get in the way. I would go into schools and so forth like that, and give my time doing talks to youngsters to try and get them to be the best that they can be. And that then many years down the line has led me into where I'm at now, which is I spend a lot of my time as a keynote speaker now. I still do voluntary talks. I still do work with kids as often as I can, but I'll often make a living now by large organisations or companies, both in sport. So I've done talks for the League Managers Association. I've done talks to the Special Forces, to the RAF, to the police force on a number of occasions. But then equally, companies, corporate companies, offices, the NHS, and even very proudly, I did a talk for my local council a couple of weeks ago as well. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah.
That's great. So is that something that you were actively looking to do, would be to move more into, say, the kind of leadership style of things, away from the physical?
I've always followed my passion. I'm still very much interested in anatomy and physiology. I'm very much interested in training. I love training. I'm interested in biomechanics, but I'm really interested in people, and I just like to try and, as I say, there's been family history of, like, I think for all of us, of ups and downs and highs and lows, and that's life, of course. I mean, everyone's just had, we've had a rough 3 years or so, haven't we? So I'm just very passionate about health, and very passionate about physical health, mental health, trying to be the best we can be. So am I perfect? Absolutely not. I'm just trying to be the best that I can be. But I'm very passionate about spreading a message, trying to say to people that, hey, we can all be the best that we can be. So it's not necessarily a leadership thing. It just happens that tends to be where I've ended up being right now. So I'm keen to talk to anyone who will listen.
So how does your week, or how does your day work out normally then? Like, do you have a plan? Do you still working from a physical coaching perspective?
Very much so. Very much so. I've got a couple of set things that I try and make as non-negotiable as possible. First and foremost, I'm a father. I'm a father to 13, nearly 14-year-old lad who is a keen kickboxer. So every Wednesday, religiously, or as best as we can, excuse me, we go kickboxing together at our local club in Chorlton, and that's our time. He really enjoys that. I'm very much, when we go there, I'm very much there to learn. I'm not his coach. I'm his dad, but I'm there as a student as well. If he gets, I mean, not that I would take our instructor on anytime soon, definitely not. But if he gets his collars felt for not doing the right thing, then that's on him. You know, he's got to deal with that, and that's part of his growth as a young man in life. But so that's something that I do. I try where possible to run a very small private clinic on one morning a week, because that keeps my eye in and keeps me active as a coach. And then the rest of my week, I run a couple of online programs, one that's peer related, but then one that is to leaders, which is called MAPS, which is to leaders and people looking to, you know, work on themselves physically and mentally. So my week is very structured, but then it can be all a bit chaos as well. And one of the things that Darren taught me many years ago, Darren worked with Red Bull for many years, and I was lucky enough to do a few years with him with that as well. But one of Darren's favourite sayings was embrace the chaos. So that's still very much what I'm doing now.
Yeah, it's a good line, that, isn't it? I think that's yeah. If you do think of it that way, it takes the pressure off a little bit. It's like, yeah, it is what it is. Let's just get on with it.
Yeah, try not to let things stress me out too much. Try and live a structured life. I'm very keen that me and my son do our things, you know, together. But then equally, you know, work's work, and we've got to pay our bills as well.
So is that how you know Doug Jones then? Through
Red Bull?
Yeah.
So that's how I met. I was lucky enough to meet Doug Jones from RTS Healthcare about 10 years or so ago now. Doug was working within another organisation at the time, but he's got his own thing set up now, and yeah, he's a good friend. I've done some athlete work with when he's had athletes. He's sometimes got me involved with them, and then equally when I've had athletes approach me who've got you know, real issues with injury and so forth like that, then, you know, it's really important to have a network around us, isn't it? And a network of experts, and Doug's very much someone who I'd consider one of those.
Yeah, no, good. Really, just a solid guy, really good guy. So no, a lot of time for Doug as well. So then, in terms of like for your future, then for one, I'm actually no, I'll start with this one. I'm very interested because like I can see you're a thoughtful person as well as on the physical side. But what from a personal development and professional development, I love books, love the self-development books. Are there any ones that you just think, yeah, this has helped change the way I think about things?
Oh, that's a good question. I have read a ton of books and still do. I read pretty much every day. I think one of the one that springs to mind is a book called Warrior by Jeff Thompson. Jeff Thompson's a martial artist from many years ago. There's two Jeff Thompsons who are both martial artists as well, but one of them has written a book called Warrior, and it was all about, and I read it many years ago, and it was all Jeff was the first person that I heard term the phrase self-mastery. And that was then when I started looking more into what self-mastery was and what it meant. And then I started to really get into, you know, mindfulness and NLP, and looking at, you know, our thoughts, how our thoughts influence our behaviors, and reframing and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I've read a million books, and some of them I'm going back and rereading a few years later, more so with a highlighter pen. But Warrior by Jeff Thompson is definitely a book that left a big impression on me, definitely.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've not heard of that one. I'll have to check it out. I love getting tips from people like you that, you know, really into this area. Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then in terms of like a philosophy from your perspective, have you got anything? I mean, if someone asked me this, I'd find it a very difficult question to answer. But have you got a philosophy that you would say you carry yourself by?
Yeah. I think I have. I think I've got a number of principles that I coach people with. I've got a number of I've got some sort of key pillar values, and I believe in having values, and I believe in being true to your values and true to who you are. And if I work with anybody, I try and communicate those values really clearly. Um, so that the people who work with me kind of know where they stand. But I think there's two or three things that really spring to mind is that I really believe in having a sort of personal code. I really believe in having a list of sort of non-negotiables, and I know what's a non-negotiable to me, and that can be minor things such as timekeeping, which I historically had a horrendous time with on a personal level, but then would want my athletes to be on time. So you reflect on yourself. So I believe in having a personal code. With, of course, life is not always that rigid, but I think that the two key things that really spring to mind is that you get what you communicate. That's one of my big ones. So communicate clearly, communicate well. Don't be afraid to have a courageous conversation and just communicate clearly. And that's a two-way and a three-way and a four-way process. So that's how I am with my clients, and that's how I like them to be with me. But then I think from a training and development, physically or mentally or both perspective, I think I'll give the credit to this to another friend and mentor of mine called Gary, who when I met Gary about 10 years ago, Gary had a very distinguished career in the special forces, and he's gone on to teach me an awful lot. And I was really fascinated. I'd probably watched too many Jason Bourne films at the time, or something like that. Too much, too much TV. But I was very, very fascinated with the special forces, and I always have been. And I remember saying to him, Gary, I want you to really teach me the methodology of the special forces, the physical and mental methodology of the special forces. And he said, okay, Rick, go and get a pen and paper. And I got there, and he said, right, write this down. I said, right, I'm ready. And he says, we do the basics well. And I was like, okay. Okay. So that's me. We do the
Yeah.
basics well.
No, I think it's good because you can get very carried away with looking at some of the other fluff, but it's like actually now what are the fundamentals that we need to do here?
Mm.
Yeah, no, I like it. And then so talk to me more about maps because I was looking on the website earlier on. It does sound interesting.
Yeah, that is my maps is my program that I've created. Um, it stands for Moylan Advanced Performance Principles, and it is based on exactly what I've just said to you there. It's based on how I coach people. It's based on my values, my core beliefs, my core principles. It's a mixture of the sports science, the NLP, all the science that I've learned over the years, fused together with the things I've learned in life, and what I've created is a hybrid program that can be adapted to go into an organization, deliver it to an organization, but equally I have a hybrid group whereby we run an online coaching platform, and then we do some face-to-face get-togethers, seminars, challenges. But the premise of it is that it's nice people, because that's one of my core values and core beliefs is be nice, because that costs nothing and it's nice to be nice. But it's nice people getting together, being vulnerable, and it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be in a safe space with your vulnerability, being vulnerable, being open, but equally trying to develop and be the best that they can be, not competing against each other, just being the best they can be.
Yeah, no, I like it. Like it now. It sounds really interesting. And then last question, you must have had many, many very memorable experiences throughout your career, but are there any ones that really stand out that you just think, this is quite remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons. There's absolutely tons. There's been some big highs, and seeing athletes win titles in stadiums and all that kind of stuff. But I think the one that stands out for me, where a real achievement, was 2015. Liam Brodie was given a wild card into Wimbledon, and he won just one match in that year in that tournament. In the first round, he beat a player called Matosevic, and Liam had been through a ton of adversity, some of which is public, a lot of which it isn't public, and will very much stay that way. But the adversity that young man had been through at that point prior, in the years leading up to that, for him to first off even be there still, and then to go out there, puff his chest out and compete and win a match, that's something that I'll always be very proud of, to know that I had just a small part in that.
Yeah, I'm sure you might think it was slightly bigger than a really small part, but it's nice to be humble as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, Rick, really appreciate that. I've been looking forward to speaking with you because again, I've followed your career and journey. So now I know that if I'd known you were 200 meters away, I would have come and sat in that pod with you there. But maybe another time.
Next time, definitely.
Brilliant. Look, Rick, really appreciate it, and I will speak to you soon.
Thanks for having me on. Take care. See you later.
Cheers. Bye bye.